Good morning. So I replaced my glass of wine last night with a cup of coffee, and kids and family are not quite awake yet. So waking up. So I figured I'd quick get the next step done in our little charity auction application. Okay, so where we left off is we've now created all the resources. We've got Doorkeeper authorization infrastructure set, but we haven't integrated the authorization capabilities. So right now you can exchange your username and password for a token that then you can pass in a request, but we actually aren't doing anything with that to set the current user. Now we're going to use the current user to do various things, but primarily on the server side we'll do it just to authorize what they can do. On the client side we'll do some other things with it, but I don't have that much time this morning, so I thought we would just take and implement the authorization into the application controller. And then we'll see if we have any time for anything else. I think the next thing after that, I had said we're going to do authorization, but I think we're not going to. I think we're going to take a break on that, switch over to the design side, actually, the UX design side, and just sort of mock out what we want the application to feel like on the client. I think it's time. It's probably past time that we did a little bit of work in Ember and the web client for this application. But first things first, let's get this authentication done. Okay. Okay, so let's sort of just think through what we want here. Now, on this application, it's not that all requests or in fact even most, need to have to be authenticated, right? We're going to allow for requests that aren't authenticated, right? To get things like the list of organizations, perhaps, or maybe not, but I would think maybe the list of items that are available. That you could have this idea of a guest user. I think that that's something that we're going to have in the application. So I don't want to sort of raise an exception if someone is not, or at least not necessarily, if someone isn't logged in when they make a request. But I want to have this idea of guest user, I think. So let's sort of go with this simple case, right? Which is that yeah. So let's go with the simple case where someone has logged in and we want to set the current user. And where we should probably start with this is the /me route. So let's go check out something in Doorkeeper. Okay. And let me go to GitHub quick to see if we've got, yeah, so this is the issue that we were working on. I should have checked that in the first place. All right, so let me look for /me. Okay. So this is sort of the convention, and it's going to be very helpful on the client side to have this /me route. So I actually think we want to do this first, right? So once I've gotten my token, I want to be able to call users /me. Now, interestingly, in this example, they have this actually as a different controller, not on the users. But I think in our case, we may want to go with the user's controller, but I have to take a pause 1 second. I got to bring a bottle to a baby. I'll be back. Okay, sorry about that. So what I think we want is if someone goes to v1 users me, that they get back the currently authenticated user. I think that that's the feature that I want to have. So the idea then is that the user requests or they create a user which isn't protected, right? They can do that just as a guest user. Then they get a token, and then they go to /me, and they get back the user that's currently authenticated with that token. Okay, so anytime I've got that sort of flow of things, I usually want to have a request spec that's going to go through that flow. So let's do that. And we also, so I mean, I could do it that way, and I think I will. I think maybe we should just add it onto the OAuth password flow spec. So once I'm here, I should be able to then go ahead and call /me. So let's add that on. Now I think that that's a little bit of this is a little bit weird to join this together. I don't love this, but you know what? I feel anxious to sort of get a test going, and I don't think I have that much time here. And then we'll see if we like how this feels later. Okay, so I'm going to say now, let's see, the access token is this. Okay, and now I will call get v1 /user /me. Okay, and this is going to be, and then we're going to want to add the headers on after this. So I'm going to go back to another application that I have just to take a look at what the syntax is on a request spec. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to pass the headers in, which are the content type, which we need for JSON API, because that's what this, the whole server is JSON API, including this. Then we're going to add the access token in like this, and this is how we're going to authenticate. And then what I'm going to expect is that I will get back the user that has this email address, or the same name, as this. But let's just check email address. So I'm going to say me equals JSON parse response body data okay, and then expect me data attributes email to equal email address. All right, and then that'll show that the /me is working. Okay, so anytime I see this, which is a no method error, whatever for nil class, that tells me I need to add an expectation above where I'm seeing the error, which was line 25, this line, and I'll say expect response.status to equal 200 here. And I see it's 400. So we're just going to take a look at what the response was. Okay, so me is not a valid value for ID. Okay, so what we want to do here is, because me is sort of a magic ID, and what I want to do then is in the user's controller, I want to, if I see me as the ID param, I want to swap in the current user. Okay, and that's how we'll fix this. So let's, so that means we need a couple things, right? We need first the current user on our application controller, and then we need to do the swapping in. So let's do the current user first. So we need to authenticate with Doorkeeper. So let's take a look at what that method is in Doorkeeper. So here we go. Before action, Doorkeeper Authorize. Now, interestingly, I'm not sure that this is really what we want entirely. We may want, because I think we want to have this idea of guest user. So I want to like authorize with Doorkeeper, but if that doesn't work, I think I'm going to want to set the user to this idea of guest user, and then we'll handle what they can do in the authorization. But you know what? We'll just like said a bird hit the window. So we're going to start with this, and I can tell we're going to change it pretty quickly, but let's start here. And let's just see what happens. So when I go Doorkeeper Authorize, okay, it does not change that. So now let's go to the user's controller. Oh, now I need a current user. Okay, and the current user is going to be the user that we find from Doorkeeper, right? The Doorkeeper user, because that's the only way we've got to authorize right now. And the Doorkeeper user will be, let's see, return unless, let's remind ourselves of some things. So there we go, Doorkeeper Token. So we need to do Doorkeeper Authorized now. I've got this Doorkeeper Token method, and this is, this is basically what we're doing here. So okay. So for now, we're not going to have a guest user, but you can tell this is where we're going to do it. So it'll be return the guest user unless there's a Doorkeeper token. And then for now, we'll just look for the user with the Doorkeeper token resource owner ID, which is the ID of the user. Okay. And I always like, sort of showing the return at the top. I think it's easier to read than putting it on as a condition on the back of the final statement. You want to do it differently, that's fine. This is how I like to do it. Okay, so now I've got the current user method. It's basically just going to be the Doorkeeper user. And I'm going to go check JSON API resources quick. And I want to take a look at this idea of context, right? Because we haven't implemented that yet, and we're going to need it in a second, so I'm going to implement it now. So you can extend context to include lots of things. For our example, I'm going to do two things. I know I'm not exactly TDDing this step, but that's okay. It'll get used in a second by something else. So I'm going to say there's the context or the current user, and then I always pass the controller context into JSON API resources. So we're going to have those two things. Okay. So I've got my current user, I've got Doorkeeper user. So now when I go to user controller, I can swap the current user's ID in for me when I see that. So let's see, this will be before action, and this will be, let's swap me with ID for me only show. I think that's what we want. Okay. So return unless params ID equals me. Otherwise, we'll say params ID equals current user try ID. And we'll see if this is right. I've done this in a little bit, but I think this is what I remember. Me is not a valid value for ID. I wonder if I have to prepend this. Let's take a look at the, in other words, I have to set it on the very beginning. So it looks like this is being, I think this is getting caught by JSON API resources, which means I'm not swapping early enough. So prepend before action, before all the actions. So we're going to do that. Oh, that is so awesome. So that was pretty straightforward, right? So let's just go through what we did here. So all we had to do to implement this /me, and again, we're going to use this because we need, once the user has an auth token, we need them to be able to say, okay, what, like, who am I? Because the auth token itself is not going to have the ID. So we wanted to add this /me, which we're going to use, and this also then was the initial test of getting the sort of authentication and connection to current user into the app, right? So we added this /me. We pass in the bearer token, we expect it'll be fine, and that what gets returned is the user resource for the current user. And all we did was, we didn't have to add this context yet. I think I was just jumping the gun because I knew we were going to when I saw it. So I'm going to take that away just to not confuse this commit. Okay, so what we do is we authorize Doorkeeper before. That's going to set the Doorkeeper token. Our current user is going to be the user we find from Doorkeeper, if there is one for now. And then on the user's controller, we're going to swap ID for me. Yep, only on the show route, which is going to give that magic power, so to speak. And we're just going to do that by setting the ID param to the current user's ID param. Okay, so that's good, and we have that simple spec that gets it done. Now we may want, well, let's run the test, and I suspect that we may have broken something else here, and many other things. Okay, so here we go. So as I said, this Doorkeeper Authorized is going to cause a lot of errors when we don't have any anyone, we're not passing in credentials, and that's really not what we want. So let's just fix one of these, and that'll fix the rest of them. And I'm kind of feeling this out as I go, right? Because this, I'm going to just say that this thing can have a public API for where you don't have to be authenticated to call it, and then we'll handle the authorization on what you can do as a separate issue. So let's just pick any one of these, right? So let's go like organizations. And fix that spec. Okay, so they all fail. And 401 here, we'll just go to, I'll do users instead. Okay, so let's go to create a user, which is sort of the very first thing that a user tends to do. Let's just look at what comes back right now, right? So that's just a 401, and 401 HTTP, just to remind ourselves what that is an unauthorized, which is what happens when there's no bearer token in the request. But we don't want that. We want someone to be able to actually request without that in this application. So let's figure out how we're going to deal with that. So if we go back to our application controller and we look at this Doorkeeper Authorized, we're going to change that. Application controller. So I'm just going to swap this to authorize. Okay. And let's see. So let's take a look at what the Doorkeeper Authorized method does. Okay, so let's open up Doorkeeper. Okay. Okay, so let's see here. So basically, it's calling this render error if there's not a valid Doorkeeper token. So render error, or see valid Doorkeeper token here, it's calling Doorkeeper Token and Doorkeeper Token acceptable. Okay, so it's this one. So we're going to drop down and use these capabilities then. So note that, below the line here is private. So we're going to so I think that we're going to use this method then, right? Because we don't want to render the error. We want to just set the current user to a guest user. For now, we'll just make it nil. So I'm going to use this method. Okay, so we'll say okay, so I think that the simplest deal then is that we can just say return unless there's a valid Doorkeeper token, and then set the current user to the result of this, which will be the user if there was, otherwise nil for now. I think that that will be fine for our current purposes at least. And it was. Awesome. Okay, so now we sort of have this like optional login idea. And right now we're not protecting any of the resources, so anyone could, any random request could do anything. And we're gonna mop that up, and we'll put some protections in later to ensure that there's no way that we could have forgotten to actually explicitly authorize every action. But I think for this point of our development, that's fine. We can get the login's working. The idea that you can authenticate the request connected to the user, that works fine. That means we can create the create user flow on the client, and then when we want to add in authorization, we're just going to sort of inject pundit policies into the JSON API resources resolution of the records, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I think And I don't think we're going to do that next, but that's how we'll do that. Okay, so let's take a look through what this change was. So we didn't change that much, which is good, right? I think this is nice and straightforward. So we tested that we can log in. We also added the me route, users me, which we were going to need anyways. So we kind of killed two birds with one stone there. We added it on to an existing test, which I think is reasonable. Request specs often have sort of many things that happen right in a row. And we have a current user that can be nil or the current user. And if we want to change to a guest user later, which we're going to for authorization, it'll be straightforward. We'll just do it right here. So good. Now, I think that the one thing that seems missing now that I'm looking at it is in our acceptance test for users. I think that we should explicitly show the me case, right? So let's do that here. Okay. Okay, so I've got the user, and now I'm going to add the header on to the request. Now let me just remind myself how to do that. Okay. So we call header authorization with that. Okay, so there's just a header method, which we already seen that, so I should have remembered that. So I'm gonna say header author. Let's see, access token. So what I need to do is look up the token for, or create a token for this user. Now let's take a look at, we just literally were looking at this. So this is this. Okay. Okay, so we're going to create a Doorkeeper access token with a resource owner ID set to the persisted user ID. And then we're going to include this as a header in the request. So example request, we'll say get v1 users me. And then we're going to expect that we get back what we thought. Now this is sort of duplicating that other test to some degree, although this is going to add it to the documentation. And that other one, I like to have a spec that sort of goes through the flow of how things work. So I'm fine with that. Okay, let's see if it's working at all. Where is this error? 83. There we go. Okay, so now let's see. Expect JSON parse response body data attributes email address. Let's make sure it's the same user. And it is. Cool. So now let's take a look and see if that documentation looks the way that we want it to. I've got /me, which gives us back what we think it should. Now this is one where we may need an explanation. So let's take a look at what the documentation was for that. Okay, so inside the example, I can add the explanation. So I'll say the special me ID for the user's resource will return the currently authenticated user. And just because we haven't done that before, I'll show what that looks like here on the docs. Here we go, just adds it there, which is what we wanted. Okay, so I think that that's a pretty full commit on this one. I think that that's what we wanted to do. So this is add authentication and slash meaning why? Okay, because need a way to add a current user to the context of the request, and because we need a way for a user to retrieve the current user from let's see, having only the auth token. Okay. So we can close this guy out now. I should have done that in the commit, but I forgot. All right. So we're good to go on that now too. So let's just sort of recap where we are. All right, so at this point we've got a server that we can create a web client where we can create a user, log that user in. We don't have like anything like the confirmation of the user with an email, and we'll add that at some point, but for right now we don't need to. So we can create a user, we can log that user in, and then we can get back who the user is, once you have the token stored, which we'll be using local storage to do on the web client, so that it works between web browser sessions. And we sort of have the basic building blocks that we can use authorization for next. But I think what I want to do after this is we're going to switch over and we're going to design sort of the basic UX, just how things are going to architecturally be set up on the web client, and start building just some basic features. One, I think I just want to get into the web client side and see how that works. And then two, I don't know, to break it up a little bit, I think that'll steer our work on the server. I think on the server, we're in a good spot, nice basic features. We don't do anything too advanced now, but it's a very, very strong infrastructure to build on, and it should be fun from here. So that's it for now.